I was working, 8 hours a day, sometimes a little more, and coming home. And by the time I get home, my daughter's already sleepy, and I'll try to squeeze in every moment that I could, but I wasn't able to know, okay, well, what's my thing? How do I fit into this equation of fatherhood? Good evening, parents. Um, as you guys have seen from the title of this video, I will be talking through some of the insecurities that I had early on as a parent. These thoughts kind of stem from a topic that we discussed in our most recent podcast episode on the essential tools and support needed for fathers. And during that segment, I mentioned how I had a really hard time accepting the, I guess, help that I was receiving from, or that me and my wife were receiving from my father-in-law. And I explained how his eagerness and I guess his excitement to be a grandfather kind of rubbed me the wrong way at times because he would do things that would kind of infringe on our privacy. And as I began to think a little further on that topic, I began to understand why I felt so enraged during that time period. And it all stemmed from my insecurity of being the father of a newborn. To dive a little deeper, it was tough because I always, well, let me just start. So, I always wanted to be a dad, primarily because I wanted to be what I didn't have. My father was killed when I was 9, and I looked up to him, and we had a pretty solid relationship, but we weren't really able to get to the point of sharing hobbies or me asking him questions or him teaching me lessons. Maybe he did teach me things, but since I was so young and I had so much going on during that time, I don't really remember much of it. So once I got a little older, like my late teens into my early 20s, I really wanted to be a dad. And that excitement of wanting to be a dad was centered around being able to do the things that I wasn't able to do with mine, and that involved, having passionate conversations, um, sharing my love for sports and teaching through sports and things that were more centered around activities. And while I knew that these things were going to come when my daughter got around, 3 to 5, maybe even a little older, I didn't understand what parenthood was going to be like before then. Um, as I'm thinking through, and I have no like script or anything, I'm looking at my computer screen because I had the video or the podcast up, but I'm just talking through these things as they come out. But I, it's so funny and kind of feels silly even saying this, but I just remember not really knowing my role as a father to a newborn. My wife was a stay-at-home mom at the time, and she sort of had everything on lock. She had everything under control. She was breastfeeding, she was changing every diaper, she was doing just about everything. And I would go to work. And while I definitely would come home and change the diaper and rock her to sleep and do the things that I was able to, the insecurity lied in two separate things. It was in the lack of affirmation that I got from her, which kind of sounds silly because I'm talking about like a 5 to 6 month old, but still, like that, the lack of that kind of mattered because when I would see my daughter respond to my wife or just kind of cry out for her, that showed that, hey, something that she's doing is of importance to my daughter. You know, when my wife would just know exactly like what she would need at that moment because of the amount of time they were spending together, that sort of gave her that affirmation needed. But I was working, 8 hours a day, sometimes a little more, and coming home, and by the time I get home, my daughter's already sleepy, and I'll try to squeeze in every moment that I could, but I wasn't able to know, okay, well, what's my thing? How do I fit into this equation of fatherhood? Because it was really, really difficult. And then you add the layer of the grandparents, and more specifically my father-in-law. He knew how to be the characters and be the kind of like the fun that my daughter as a 6 month old used to find hilarious. And while I knew that it wasn't my job to make her laugh, it was my job to protect and provide and to teach later on. While I didn't know my role, just seeing that made me feel like, okay, well, what do I do? And that's why in the podcast I mentioned, I wasn't necessarily jealous. I was just more so confused as to, okay, if mommy does that, grandma does that, and grandpa does that, what do I do? Because as a 6 month old, my daughter doesn't care about me going to work to buy the groceries. She doesn't even understand that yet. And without that understanding, I just didn't really know what to do. And that was a really, really, really tough. And things didn't get remotely better until my daughter just got a little older. She started to say, like the dad and stuff around the 6 month time. But when I really started to realize that she knew who I was when she got like 10, 11 months. And that was when she would kind of feed off the excitement that my wife would get when I would get home from work. And that made me feel a little better. But yeah, early on, it was extremely tough. And what made matters like way worse was that I had no relationship with God. I had no prayer life. We were not going to church. So I didn't know what my objective biblical role was as a father. Because even today, my daughter's almost 3 now, and while I am able to teach her, and while I am able to see the things that she's picking up from me and my wife, and that gives me, validation that we're doing something right, at the time, I did not know anything. I was honestly just winging it, and had I had a relationship with God beforehand, I would have had a bit more confidence in a role. I would have had more confidence in knowing that I am supposed to be in support of my wife during these times. I am supposed to be whatever the case it was. It's hard for me to even think about going back and what my role was, but not having a relationship with God and not being able to pray about these things really hindered my ability to, I guess, mitigate the anxiety. And as I'm just thinking through this, I might have to go back and chop a lot of this stuff up because I'm honestly just thinking straight through this. But one thing that I just thought about is I honestly just felt like I was an assistant to my wife. And that really, really did it for me. And all of this played a role into the fury and the anger that I would have whenever I would see my father-in-law just barge inside to come get my daughter, or when we would come over, how he would just like take her from my wife's arms before we even got a chance to sit down. All of these things don't really matter. They're just tiny little things, but they would just strike a nerve because I didn't know my role. I didn't know my thing to do. And yeah, that was really, really tough. It was tough. Whereas now I'm able to see that my daughter recognizes little things. Like, I wear this hat all the time, especially at work. But there are times where we go on dates, and my wife and I will go on dates, and I wouldn't have my hat on, and my daughter would be like, "Daddy, where's your hat? You need to get your hat," and stuff. And little things like that just show, like, oh, she's aware of my patterns. Little things like noticing how she will remind us to pray before we start eating. Seeing her around the house sing certain gospel songs. Little things like that allow me to know, okay, what we're doing is working. But at 6 to 7 to 9 months, I got none of that. I mean, she would laugh when I would tickle her, and we'll definitely have our moments, but it wasn't anything consistent. I would get home on a daily basis and just be like, all right, let's see what happens today, and yeah. So to conclude this sort of like, I guess, diary entry, let's say baby number 2 comes around. The way that I would go about it differently is to pray and to dive deep into the word and just understand how I am to support my wife through this. Because one thing that's very important early on is when my daughter was 6 months, my wife was only 6 months, postpartum. So she was going through kind of like a transition too, like the body getting back to normal and going through all that stuff. And as I'm thinking about it, I was so focused on me and my role and stuff. I don't even remember if I was able to be like super supportive to my wife during the time. And it's hard for me to really like go back and think about those times, because whatever my life was before I got saved, I'm not saying I forgot about it, but I just understand that as like an old me that has passed away. So it's really, really difficult for me to kind of like get in the mindset and think through things with that old style of mindset. But today, let's say, a year or two into having a baby, I would find confidence and solace and all of the affirmation I would need in just supporting my wife in every way possible. Because while she is doing everything she can to literally be a lifeline to my daughter, by breastfeeding and stuff, I have to also understand that she's also recovering. And I will be able to get my affirmation and validation and solace and just giving her a time to chill. Whenever I would see that she's painting her nails or doing her hair or doing anything that doesn't involve the baby for maybe an hour or two throughout the day, maybe I'll find what I needed in that, and I'll find my confidence in that. Because my favorite Bible verse in the whole Bible is Ephesians 5:25, that says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church." And that imperative statement is a rule that I genuinely think would keep households together. And that is something I didn't even have a clue of when my daughter was just born, you know. So yeah, if you also have gone through this, um, as a father, if you're going through this, leave a comment and let me know that I'm not the only one. I understand that this video doesn't seem to have much of a resolution because I just kind of waited it out, and after my daughter got like 1 to 2, we got like this, and we're tight now. But yeah, I guess if you're currently going through this, just know that patience is needed through this, and this will be a good time, if you haven't already, to develop a relationship with Jesus, because I don't wish this on anybody. There were certain times I was just like, yo, what do I do? What do I do? So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Please get in the comments, and if you are a father of a newborn and you pretty much had everything together, let us know exactly what you did to help other people out, and heck, even me, you know. But thanks for listening to this. I'll send you the bill for the therapy session soon in the comment section. Just bill me an invoice. But you guys have a good night, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.